Hey, good evening. It's Wednesday night for our midweek. So great to have you here, and we're going to do our class together for the men and the women. We're talking about community, and it's interesting as we think about our vision for the church. I want to just read it because it has a special relevance. It says, Christ has changed us, and we want to change Tucson and the world for Him. By the year 2030, we dream of establishing 50 small groups of disciples within 30 minutes of the campus. And we'll accomplish this by converting and training loving servant leaders. When we came up with that 2030 vision, it's interesting to have 50 groups of disciples spread out throughout Tucson. That was our vision. Why not use this coronavirus crisis to advance our church's goals? Doesn't that make sense?
Makes so much sense.
Totally makes sense to me. I go, okay, it's kind of crazy right now, but we already have our growth groups. We've got house churches and small groups. This can provide what the world needs. Let's take a look in Luke chapter 5 in verse 17. I'm going to ask Pam to go ahead and read that.
Great. All right, Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 17. It says, One day Jesus was teaching, and Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They had come from every village of Galilee and from Judea and Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal the sick. Some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay him before Jesus. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, Friend, your sins are forgiven.
Okay, there's something so touching and powerful about this short little story about these four guys helping their buddy climb the roof, get through the roof, crash in on Jesus. And Jesus is so impressed, he's like, whoa. When he says he saw their faith collectively, he says, friend, your sins are forgiven. It was something awesome that Jesus saw. And it's just a very small little vignette of Jesus' life and ministry. It happens in a single room. Of course, there's people crowding around. And Jesus looked at it and was inspired. It's this kind of love and care for one another, this sense of community. That's what makes the Christian church so powerful and potent and more relevant than ever, is when we can create that in our church right here in Tucson. Why? Because love is small. I know that sounds funny, but it is so true. Love is small. Now, the concept of love is huge. It's massive. I mean, whole industry of writing love songs. I mean, it's deep, it's wide, it's powerful, but in a way, think about this. Love is very small because it happens on a very small scale. Let me give you an example of that. When Pam and I went to Terry Neely's funeral, oh my gosh. She's an elder's wife, passed away a few years ago up in Phoenix. And it was very interesting as people shared stories about Terry Neely's life. They got up and shared their testimonies about her impact on their lives. What struck me was how small the events were that touched people's lives. Like, Terry baked bread for me. Terry made some clothes for me. Terry did this. And, I mean, it was very small, very ordinary things done with a lot of love, but on a very small scale. But I was crying. I was touched. I mean, everyone was moved, but it was small. And I think about, Jesus' interactions with people. Now, no one's had a larger, more universal, galactic impact than Jesus Christ, right? But when you think about his ministry, the stories we preach on an average Sunday, it's all happening on a very small scale. Think about the story I preached this last Sunday. Do you still remember it?
I do.
You just go, okay. It's going on a very, very, very small little scale. But, it was actually 2 Sundays ago, I was talking about the bleeding woman. And the bleeding woman, you think about it, it's a little event, little tiny, this woman comes up, touches him, and he says, hey, who touched me? Happens on a very, very small scale, and yet it's so significant. How about in the upper room the night before Jesus got crucified? It's just his disciples. It's one room. And he gets down and he washes his disciples' feet. And he builds an entire sermon and teaching around that one very small act of love. Yeah. But it's so powerful. I mean, it's been recounted for centuries. Love is small. It happens on a small scale. And yet its impact is massive. And that's what we've got to remember about what it means to be a part of a loving church. It's hard to be loving on a big scale. It usually happens on a very small scale. Right. And these things don't happen in a stadium. They happen very, very small. Blind Bartimaeus, remember? Hey, Lord Jesus, Son of David, help me. And he shouted and yelled till he got his attention.
Can I share something about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this passage in Luke 5 that we just read because, like Rob said, love is small. But the thing is if just that one man just had that love for that paralyzed man on the mat, that wouldn't have been enough.
Right.
It wouldn't have gotten him to the roof. It had to be those 4 men. They each had a little bit of love that made a lot of love.
Right. To
really decide, no matter what the obstacles are, we're going to bring our friend to Jesus. And I just think it's really powerful. It took a little bit of love combined. They were unified. They were working together. And, I just love that they said, it's not when they saw the crowds, they went, oh, we better go home because we're not going to get through. I mean, the act of them getting to the roof, doing that and bringing their friend right in front of Jesus just shows the power of the love that we need to have for our friends.
That's
and,
right.
and work together.
Totally. Such a great example. Absolutely. We've come to equate church in modern America with big church, with large gatherings, super churches. And I love church. Listen, I mean, some of my great memories are at church. It has a place for sure. And it's so encouraging. It can be powerful. It can be inspiring. I still remember the first church gathering of our church here in Tucson, like 483 people. I still remember the number. It was awesome. It was great. Gave me a vision about the future. But our deepest needs relationally and personally are most often met on a much smaller scale. That's where our relationship needs, our emotional needs really get met, is usually in homes. And growth groups or house churches are places where you can have friends, be accepted, and feel loved. Don't you want that? I want that. I mean, absolutely. Do you want that?
I do.
I do.
I want that.
I totally
do.
It's such a huge need. And Cigna Insurance Group did a study, and it came up with nearly 50% of Americans are experiencing chronic loneliness. The average person has only one close relationship. 13% of those surveyed said they have 0 people in their lives with whom that they can confide. Guys, think about that. This is a survey done before COVID. Brigham Young University did a survey. They said loneliness is a major public health issue and represents a greater health risk than obesity. And it's as destructive to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. In the journal Perspectives on Psychological Science, they conducted 70 surveys with over 3 million people. The result was that social isolation and loneliness can increase mortality rates by up to 32%, depending on other factors. So what's the bottom line here? Again, all these things are happening before COVID. How much more severe do you think people are struggling with the results of this? Basically saying you have a 1/3 chance greater of dying if you're isolated and lonely. And listen, that's what we're seeing here. Some people, unfortunately, they're not even watching this. You know why? Because they've stopped coming to church. They're not returning texts. They're not returning phone calls. They're mad. They're angry. They're upset for different reasons. And they've pulled back in the church. And I go, I feel for those people because they're suffering. And they're really struggling. And they're all by themselves. And that's just in the church. we're not even talking about outside the church.
Yeah. And like Rob shared, all those things are before COVID. Now, with COVID, we haven't seen some people in our church for months. I'll tell you what, one of the highlights for me this past weekend, on Saturday, we had a birthday celebration for Rosalia Bailey. And I walked into Rosalia's house, and of course, we're all wearing our masks, we're all socially distanced. And the first person I saw was Ed Biggers. I'm like, Ed, forget all the sisters. I'm so happy to see you. Because I haven't seen Ed personally in months. And he was there dropping off Paula. And it was so great to see Paula and Alma and Anna Karina, Greta, Kim Avery, Doreen, Kim Hoger. I mean, we were all there just so fired up to be together because it's been so long.
Yeah.
And, I hope soon we can get back together. But the reality is that there are some of us, we're not getting that kind of fellowship. We are isolated. I mean, even with COVID, it's just getting worse. I mean, with marriages, right? Just a statistic that I recently read, that some of the people that are the busiest right now during COVID are divorce lawyers. They are busy because the divorce rate's up 34% during COVID. So there's such a need to reach out, to connect. People are wanting relationships. And in the church, we need to provide that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, baby. We've got a chance to meet a need that's so deeply felt right now in America. We guys, if we could just view this as disciples, we have an opportunity to provide something God has given us as disciples, which is the love we have for one another, to help a society that is suffering, lonely, isolated. I mean, I've been on campus a lot recently, and it's just sad to see people just they're just drifting around. They're like ghosts out there. There's no connection. We've got a chance to meet a need in the country that's so deeply felt right now. If we can only view ourselves as, hey, maybe God has called me to really act during this time, to be courageous, to be bold, to actually put my faith into action. When I became a Christian, I didn't actually go to church until I got baptized. I don't remember going to church. Now, I may have gone one time at the most. To me, church was my small group. It was the Bible talk that I went to. It was the people that reached out to me, Kurt and Steve and Greg. That was my church. And then I went to church, and I think it was after I got baptized, or shortly after. Now, I wouldn't recommend this, but it was like, wow, this is awesome too. But to me, church was the small group. That was it. I mean, there was a sense like, hey, this is amazing, and this is even better. You got more people. And that's what church can be right here in Tucson. Your house, your neighborhood can be impacting. We don't have, there's no magic at Mansfield, okay? That's a great building. I mean, I'm grateful for that time. But, we started a church in our home in Ashland. It grew to be a large church. I think about the churches in Indonesia. You want to share about those?
Yeah, I do. Yes, Harlem and Vanya Salim lead the churches in Indonesia. And we had a chance several years ago to visit Jakarta. And they're known for just doing amazing things with their small groups. And, they talk about doing life together.
Right.
And it was really inspiring. And we got to have lunch with their Bible talk. And, it was really a cool experience, because they have been reaching out to very, very influential people in that city. For example, the man that was sitting next to me having lunch, I asked him, so, what do you do for work? And he said, oh, well, I'm a banker. And I said, oh, well, what bank do you work for? He said, oh, no, it's my bank. And I was like, oh, of course it is. Of course it is. But that was just the caliber of people that we were having lunch with that were in this one Bible talk. Doctors, lawyers, architects. And they just decided that those are the kind of people they needed to reach out to. And this Bible talk was having a major impact, not only in their church, but throughout the city of Jakarta.
Yeah. And that country is a predominantly Muslim nation, and they're having a massive impact. It's probably the fastest growing church in the world, in our family of churches, I mean, they've got like 3,500 disciples or more. I mean, it's amazing. Or maybe it's 35 churches and 6,000 disciples. It's a lot of people. And it's the largest Muslim population of any country in the world. And so the impact there is awesome, but it's based on small groups, people doing life together. Listen, we can do that right here in Tucson. Large churches or mega churches can't provide the sense of spiritual family that people really need to thrive spiritually. There's nothing bad about large churches. I've been to some and it's awesome. You know, the smoke show, the lights, the fireworks, the concerts. It's powerful. It's awesome. But at a personal level, if you walk into a large church and you walk out and you haven't connected with anybody, then that's not going to really meet the needs what the average person is really looking for. Social media, it's casting a phantom shadow over people's relationships where it gives the impression that you've got a lot of friends, but in reality you don't. You know, in my podcast, I've been, doing my podcast. I've got like 40 episodes out there. And guess what? I didn't have that many friends on Facebook before, but I'm getting tons of them now. People from Africa, people from Asia, people from Europe, all over India. I don't know who they are, but they're my friends. And I go, okay, oh well, now I've got 2,000 friends. Wow. But listen, how are we going to build that sense of community? Community is a byproduct of two things. Number one, it's a byproduct of really worshiping God, people fully committed to God in their hearts, really connecting with God. And number two, the mission, people working together to save the lost. And when our focus is on God and on the people who need God the most, the result is we get bonded together, accomplishing that, working together toward that. And it's kind of a secondary product of that focus on God and people who need Him. I think about the Davis-Monthan military group. Those people have taken off and started with Justin reaching out to Seth, and then Ray Miller was there, and then boom, they reached out to Brian and Amy, and now the Musselmans moved in. But if you go over to their house, and they've continued to meet together in a small group all throughout COVID, you just know why. Because the vibe is there. There's a family, there's food, there's fellowship.
There's really good donuts.
There's great donuts, honey. I want a donut right now. And you just go, it's awesome. And I just remember going there going, if we could just like transmit this all over and just kind of replicate this all over Tucson, we'd have an explosive church. That's what we need. I think about Ed Rodriguez. Ed Rodriguez has got some serious health issues. He had a liver transplant about 10 years ago. I mean, he's lucky to be alive. God's really blessed him. But from the beginning of this COVID crisis, Ed could have just said, hey, I'm not going to see anybody at all. Instead, he pulled in Russell Cottrell, and they've been worshiping together with Russell and with Greta, of course. And I go, I really respect that. I go, he took a risk. And yet there's a lot of love there saying, hey, we're going to pull in people. We're going to worship together. We've got a chance to move our church forward, to build the health and strength of our church, and to build deeper bonds of love and friendship. But what's it going to take? It's going to take courage. It's going to take courage to overcome fear and spiritual laziness. And let's just be honest. Some of us, we're using COVID, and in spite of the fact that the numbers have just dropped precipitously, and we're in a relatively healthy age and cohort, we're still just going, oh, I don't feel comfortable. I go, okay, what's the source of this? You're saved, you're going to heaven. Be careful. Because you're responsible to God, okay? And you got to take a look and go, is this spiritual laziness? Because as disciples, we got nothing to fear. We're going to heaven. We're saved. And God has called us to be different from the world and to be able to serve the world. And we need to be able to love enough to pull people into our lives. And now is such an incredible opportunity to do that. People are dying for relationships if you can see that. And the faith to believe that God will work where we live with the people that are around us. This is an opportunity, brothers and sisters. In time, we're going to be meeting in larger gatherings. we're going to pull back together and it's going to be awesome. And everything's going to go back to relatively normal. But let's not miss this opportunity. This crisis can be our chance to move forward spiritually for Christ. The chance to build deeper, more powerful community than ever before. So let me leave you some next steps. Meet in your homes on Sunday with people around you. Get together, man. Don't miss the opportunity. Enjoy the fellowship in small groups. I appreciate Martine. He called me and just said, man, it was awesome on Sunday. I had a bunch of people into my house, not a bunch, like, a few families. He said it was so encouraging.
Yeah.
And I go, that's the way it should be. I go, that encourages everybody, lifts everyone's spirits, and builds a better way. Serve the people around you. How? Welcoming them into town, helping them to move in, unpack, encouraging people on their birthdays, calling them, texting them makes a difference. Bring your friends out to your place. Just, hey, come on over, we're having a home worship. Worship God together and study the Bible with those people. Man, if we do that, we have the best chance to build our church stronger than ever before. Let's do it together. Let's build an awesome spiritual community. Love you guys.
Love you too.